Sorry Now, Paul Turner Mystery, Book 1. Author Mark Richard Zubro. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1991. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 8. Mrs. Tolucci brushed aside several large, beefy sergeants and spoke quietly. I called the police about 10 minutes ago. I saw 3 men lurking in the alley behind your house. They tried to get inside by the back door. I don't think Brian heard them. I called your house. Brian was upstairs. I told him to lock himself in the bathroom. 2 minutes before the police showed up, the men disappeared around the other side of the house. We don't know if they got in or not, a lieutenant said. We've got every car in the district within a 3-block radius of here. I told them to pick up anybody who looks the least bit out of place. Turner looked at the crowd gathered at the end of the street. He thought that if these guys were smart, if they hadn't gotten into the house, they'd mingle with the crowd and not try to get away. He turned his gaze back to his home. I'm going in, he said. A lieutenant, a captain, and 2 sergeants quoted hostage procedures to him. If these were killers, and they'd gotten in, people could get hurt. And they didn't know where Brian was. Turner knew he was going in. He waited for a distraction to pull the others' attention away from the scene, and got it a few minutes later when a camera crew from one of the local TV stations pulled up. They immediately tried to move as close to the scene as possible. A minor shoving match developed when the zeal of both reporters and cops reached an aggressive stage. As the assembled brass's attention wavered, Turner moved. Carefully and quietly he approached his home. He'd lived here most of his 35 years. He'd grown up knowing the cracks and crevices of every inch of this space. On the dark side of the porch, he found the old water spout he used to climb down as a 12-year-old, sneaking out on warm nights just like this one to watch the adults and older kids perform their magic rites of summer up and down Taylor Street. He'd reinforced the gutters and spouts 2 years ago, as silently as he had done 23 years ago. He scrambled up the side, hearing muffled curses behind him. He felt more than saw other figures now silently moving toward the house. He gouged his hand as he swung himself onto the top of the porch. Blood oozed from the wound. Facing the sidewalk, the rooms preceded Brian's bedroom, his bathroom, and Turner's own bedroom. He landed near Brian's bedroom window and called his son's name softly. No answer. He listened intensely. Sounds from the street and the crowd, nothing from inside. He knew he wouldn't be able to break into any of the windows or screens. They could only be opened by a special catch inside, which he had installed himself, so he knew they'd hold. Inch by inch, he moved his head so that he could see into his son's room. Through the screen, he observed the room's contents: 2 footballs and 3 baseball bats strewn across the bed, at least 6 pairs of athletic shoes scattered around the floor, a pile of odoriferous gym clothes in a corner, all definitely undisturbed by human presence at the moment. The roof of the porch still felt warm to his touch from the heat of the day. He crawled along the tar paper to the next window. This would be the bathroom, closest to Brian's room, the nearest place with a lock on the door. If he'd been up here when the call came, Paul wiped the still oozing blood from his hand on his shirt. He'd abandoned his suit coat in the car, crouched under the windowsill, and again called his son's name softly. He held his breath, and then called again. A moment later, he heard a soft, "Dad?" Paul whispered. "It's me, Brian. Open the window as carefully and quietly as you can." A minute later, he saw Brian's face appear. His son's broad shoulders made a tight squeeze, but seconds later, he crouched next to his dad. Paul put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think so." "What's going on?" "Dad, Mrs. Tolucci talked half in Italian. I couldn't understand all of it, just the part about hiding." Brian sounded a little shaken, but seemed generally okay. "Somebody might be trying to get into the house." "Holy shit! Good thing Jeff's not here. We'd have to go in and rescue him." Paul grinned at the youthful daring of his older son. The cops below called up to them. With silence now less vital, they talked in normal tones. Brian climbed down as if he knew exactly where to go. Turner didn't want to know how the teenager moved across the roof so easily and quickly. Minutes later, the cops rushed the house. They found it empty after 15 minutes of fruitless search, which included Paul and Brian thoroughly examining the house. A sergeant on the street remarked, "It was probably a false alarm." Unfortunately for him, Mrs. Tolucci heard the comment. Fortunately, Turner was close by and halted her attack. Few things stopped Mrs. Tolucci. Definitely not a police sergeant, only twice her size. After Turner had calmed Mrs. Tolucci down, the two of them stood in a cluster of police brass and discussed the possibilities. A beat cop approached them and said, "We got at least 3 other calls, all within minutes of each other, reporting the same thing. And that's one of the reasons help came so quick. Plus, someone said it was a cop's house." Mrs. Tolucci beamed. She'd been around long enough to know what makes cops move. The beat cop also said, "We found somebody down at the end of the alley. He says he saw 3 guys run out of here about half an hour ago." "He got a description?" Turner asked. "White males, 1 tall, 2 shorter, ran out down Polk Street. We're canvassing the neighbors down that way to see if anybody saw anything." The commander drove up. Apprised of the situation, he arranged for a cop outside the house until further notice. By 1 o'clock, the neighborhood had calmed down. Paul spent a half hour talking to Brian. The kid seemed more excited than scared. Before they went to bed, Paul reminded him that he needed to start on his regular summer chores tomorrow. And now that the garage was clean, this night he got only minor teenage complaints about the unfairness of housework. Tired though he was from lack of sleep, Tuesday, Paul Turner slept little that night. He tried listening to the soothing prattle of an all-new station. He learned the temperature wouldn't drop below 80 overnight and would rise to the high 90s tomorrow. He kept his gun loaded in the top drawer of the nightstand for the first time in his 15 years as a cop. He lay awake, imagining the horror of losing one of his sons. Around 3, he almost called the hospital to check on Jeff, but realized he was being paranoid. He'd worked with them before, and he trusted the security force at the hospital. He knew whoever was after them had to be an amateur. A criminal who wanted a case to be dropped had to warn off an entire department or had to have enough clout to get an investigation called off from the top. And in a murder case, it would be extremely difficult even for someone incredibly well connected. So whoever did it couldn't be well connected and didn't know police procedure. He kept in mind Ian's gay conspiracy angle, but he knew there were far more likely possibilities. "You look like hell," Fenwick said to him. The next morning, Turner explained the attempted attack on his house last night. Fenwick said, "Double and triple fuck. Who are these people?" At roll call, they discussed the murder, the pranks against right-wing people, and the attack. Many of the detectives offered opinions and advice. None had a solution. "Anything unusual in the Muckleroth camp?" Turner asked. Wilson said, "I got the report as I came in from the stakeout. Absolutely nothing. I went to last night's rally. Do you guys know he now keeps an urn with his daughter's ashes in front of the speaker's platform? He refers to it in his speech. He works the crowd up, which I guess is pretty normal. Then he talks about his daughter. 90,000 people and not a dry eye in the bunch." "He uses his daughter?" Fenwick asked. "Absolutely. It's pretty sick. But I bet the coffers are overflowing. We should get on the angle that someone is taking revenge on him," Turner said. "It's got to be someone he's heard or who knows him. Who's doing background on him?" Rodriguez raised his hand. "I've got nothing so far. Try some more digging. Anything in his background anywhere might help." "It's tough," Rodriguez said. "They've got his life compartmentalized. If they don't want you to know it, it's not around. It may have come across as open to you, but his organization is tighter than any group I've ever dealt with." "Keep trying," Turner said. "Also, let's expand the search to other prominent preachers. Somebody's got to have a grudge against him. Get somebody to help you with it," the lieutenant added. "This is top priority. Somebody's after Paul's kids. That's bullshit." Generally, detectives didn't have time to do the investigations people expected from watching TV shows. The workload for real cops was too great, and often in-depth checking wasn't necessary. Statistically, the vast majority of non-gang related killings were done by someone close to the victim, friend or relative. Fairly easy to identify. Because of Mucklerat's prominence and the play The media gave his daughter's murder. They would get more attention than most. Maybe this wasn't fair, but it was certainly reality. Are the killings and these pranks really related? Wilson asked. They all looked at Turner. I don't know. We've got two senseless murders. The preacher's daughter and Wilmer. You can't discount those prank incidents, Rodriguez said. They may not be murder, but you've got the similar messages. Turner shook his head. Could be copycats. It's starting to be too many coincidences. I can't prove it, but my instincts say they aren't related. The lieutenant said, You're going to have to explore that angle. It's weird, but who knows? Carruthers said, You're not really connecting the death of the old shit Wilmer with these, are you? He was old, ignorant, and somebody told me he had AIDS. Who gives a shit about him? I do, Turner said. If I'd listened to him in the first place, we might have some answers. He told them what he'd learned in the talks he'd had last night at the mission. We need to follow up his movements that day, which probably means interviewing every homeless bum on the west side. They divided that duty up by blocks, knowing they'd have to ask some of the beat cops to help. How about that non-murder stuff? Rodriguez asked. I'll be checking that today, Turner said. Wilson said, That friend of yours, Hume, the one with the slouch fedora all the time, got interviewed by one of the national networks. He talked about an international conspiracy. If it keeps up, we're going to have 1 million reporters fucking things up. Turner said, We've got our cases to solve. We can deal with reporters if we have to. At his desk, Turner first began to organize the paperwork involved. They'd be buried in the shed up to their armpits even if they solved the whole thing today. A terrific breeze blew outside from the south. Unfortunately, the squad room window faced west. That earned them only an occasional puff of relief. Fenwick plugged the fan in. Someone on the night shift had left it on high. Before he could unplug it, papers flew. Fenwick swore, calling the squad on the night shift double and triple shits. When he got the fan under control, Turner could feel the breeze, but it barely kept up with the sweat that beaded on him from just sitting there. The weather reports predicted storms and more humidity. He tried calling Jay Kendall, the columnist who had been set up with a fake story. The reporter became suspicious and started pressing Turner for details and reasons for the call. After 10 minutes of verbal fencing, Kendall admitted he had no idea who had set him up. They covered their tracks completely. We haven't been able to figure out who owned the home they took me to in Springfield. The neighbors claim it's been vacant for years. State records show dummy corporations, and some of the title and deed background material is missing. We're still investigating. He tried the chancery office for the bishop, whose nude pictures were circulating. His cop status didn't get him past the receptionist. If he called back, he might be able to get through to the diocesan press relations department. After the phone calls, Fenwick said, I feel bad about what happened to Wilmer. If I'd been a little more patient, he shrugged. We don't make perfect decisions, Turner said. Who could have said this time he knew something? I wish I'd listened more, but I'm not going to kick myself over it. It's done. Fenwick said, Yeah, you're right, I guess. What I want to know is, where was Wilmer going that day? Ajax said a meeting with somebody. But who? Fenwick asked. Wilmer didn't tell Ajax? No, but a reasonable guess is an appointment with the killers. How did he know them? Fenwick asked. He saw something at Oak Street Beach, Turner guessed. He was there. That's Lakeshore Drive area, Fenwick said. They don't let the bums into that part of town, do they? I know bums sleep on the beaches in Lincoln Park. I've seen them early in the morning. Maybe he walked down from there. Think, Buck. If he didn't see it, how did he know the killers? Turner asked. Let's call back our witnesses and see if they remember seeing a bum. They had the witnesses' home and work numbers. None of them remembered seeing anyone of Wilmer's description. After those calls, Fenwick suggested they go back to Wilmer's. Maybe we missed something the first time. A wind galled through the canyons of the city as they passed Sears Tower on Franklin, then turned west on Madison. It's going to be a hell of a storm when it hits, Fenwick said. Turner said, I wish it would make its mind and get it the hell over with. They entered Wilmer's building and trudged up the steps. Experienced cops, they had thoroughly inspected the space the day before. Still, they hunted over every inch. They even pulled back the tattered linoleum. Nothing. At one point, Fenwick tried to open the window. Double fuck, he swore when his heaving exertions produced no effect. He mopped his forehead with an enormous red-checked handkerchief. He said, "This is how I imagined hell. Close, hot, humid, no breeze." He glanced through the filthy window. He got a view of a mass of bricks 2 feet away. No fire escape either. Crumbling brick makes a hell of an exterior decoration. He turned back to the room. Turner stood in the doorway. He felt sweat drip from his armpits. What was his life like? Hell. No, I mean seriously. He showed up at the station constantly. He must have hung out down there a lot. It's not far, but it's a walk for an old drunk. Where else did he go? The mission, the hospital, any other place he felt like it in the city. I wonder if he went directly from the mission to his appointment. Appointment? Sounds like doctor shit to me, Fenwick said. Let's trace his path from the mission to the hospital. As they walked down the stairs, Turner said, It's too hot in here. That's probably why he spent as many nights as he could at the mission. He couldn't sleep in this dump. Even if he was used to wearing all those clothes, the heat had to be impossible for him to sleep in. As they got out of the car across the street from the mission, Fenwick said, We are not really going to walk all the way from here to the hospital. Not in this heat. If he could do it, we can. Fenwick grumbled, but agreed. After 2 blocks, Fenwick said, How do we know he took this way? Maybe he and a buddy grabbed a few snootfuls somewhere, or he took another direction for some side trip. Come on, Buck, Turner said. It was hot that day. He'd take the most direct route. We can grab a cab back if you want, and then try the other streets. As they walked, they passed a few small businesses and numerous boarded-up shops, as well as rubble-covered vacant lots, some still burned out from the riots in the 60s. In every business they stopped to ask if anyone knew Wilmer had seen him that Saturday. Everybody they met, kids included, they asked about the old man. Their progress got slower and slower. Fortunately, the neighborhood was essentially uninhabited. The westward movement of the Loop renovation wouldn't get here for a number of years yet. When they got to Ashland Avenue, they turned north. Now the wind blew directly on their backs. The swirl of the gust were almost enough to dry the sweat on their bodies. They'd long since shed their coats. Fenwick carried his draped over one arm. Turner slung his across his shoulder, hanging onto it with a finger under the collar. 40 futile minutes later, they arrived at the hospital. It might have been a 10-minute walk from Madison, but their interviews had slowed them considerably. At the hospital, they asked if someone could check the records to see if Wilmer had been in last Saturday. It took 15 air-conditioned minutes. It would seem to fly by for them to get a negative answer. Fenwick and Turner glanced at each other as they emerged in the miserable dampness outside. Didn't work, Turner said. We should have called and asked. We had to try, Fenwick said. Besides, I got some exercise. It wasn't the first time in their partnership that one had gone along with an off chance, the other suggested. As they walked back, Turner said, As long as the lieutenant is giving us as much manpower as we need right now, why don't we let the beat cops check all the other streets? Fenwick agreed. There were only a few streets that Wilmer could have taken between Madison and the hospital, but a team of men would be better than the 2 of them alone. At the station, Turner called back the Chancery office. He got an official who claimed to know nothing of any pictures. The bishop was on his way to Rome for a long-planned vacation. What Fenwick and Turner did next was paperwork. After a late lunch, eaten at their desks, they waded into the mounds of forms and reports required by the department. They sat for 3 hours, typing, grumbling, sweating, and drinking coffee. Turner rubbed his eyes at 5 and sighed. I'm not getting enough sleep, he told Fenwick. Worried about the kids? Yeah, a little. The neighborhood is good, safe. Like last night with everybody calling the cops. Jeff at the hospital will be okay. Chasing after Brian and his friends the other night when his buddy's car broke down didn't help. Be glad they called you. They were scared to call the kid's dad, right? Brian and his friends trust you. Or at least I was the best parental alternative of the moment, Fenwick said. I envy your relationship with your kids. You're good at this parent shit. Turner said, I've got to take a break. I'm going to check in on Jeff. I'll be back in an hour or so. Take your time. All this shit will still be here. Turner half hoped he'd run into Manfred at the hospital. He hadn't had time to call him. In Jeff's room, he found his son napping and Mrs. Tolucci reading Descartes. At 7, he drove back toward the station. A massive thunderhead towered over the western horizon. He could see occasional flashes of lightning, but it was still too far away to hear the rumble of the storm. He hoped this meant a break in the weather. His radio came to life at the corner of Grand and Halstead, near Goose Island, an old industrial district trying to make a comeback as a mixture of light industry, yuppies, and trendy shops. The dispatcher told him to get in touch with the station. He called and got hold of Fenwick. His partner said, Hurry back here. We've got a break in the old drunk's case. Turner rushed through the streets. Varieties of trash swirled in the wind of the rising storm. Rushes of cool air burst through the open window of the un-air-conditioned car. Fenwick jumped in the car as Turner pulled up to the station. We got a tip, he said as he fastened his seatbelt, from another bum on the west side. Anybody we're familiar with? Name didn't ring a bell. He supposedly lives in the same building as Wilmer did. I thought it was uninhabited, Turner said. We should have seen him or had some hint of his presence yesterday or this morning. They all run and hide when we come around. Supposedly he talked to your buddy Ajax, and he knows something. While I was out grabbing something to eat, Ajax called, asked for you. Didn't leave a number, but said it was urgent. Turner hurried to Lake Street and headed west. Severe thunderstorm warning out, Fenwick said. I think they got it right for once. Black clouds now filled the entire western horizon. Where are we supposed to meet this guy? Turner asked. In the building, I guess. I didn't get the call. Somebody down at 11th and State did. I just got the message. No one waited for them outside Wilmer's building. First, they walked around the exterior. Brutal gusts of wind forced them to bend into the wind. No movement or light from inside gave any hint of current habitation. Let's check the place, Fenwick said. We can start in Wilmer's room. They entered Fenwick carrying the flashlight. The natural gloom of the interior combined with the gathering darkness made it nearly impossible to see inside the building. The old stairs creaked as they climbed to the top floor. As they reached the last step, Turner said, Did I just hear something downstairs? He looked over the banister and listened intently. The stairs climbed in such a way that he could see down to the ground floor. Just the weather, Fenwick said. Let's hurry so we can get the hell out of here. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled as they reached the door to Wilmer's room. It was open. They'd left it closed that morning. For a moment they heard drops of rain tattoo on the roof sporadically. Then with a rush, the storm hit in earnest. Rain pounded on the roof. Seconds later, drips began in the hallway. I don't like this, Turner had to shout over the roar of the rain and the crash of thunder, now almost continuous. Fenwick shouted in return, Fuck this shit. Let's look and get out. He shone the light through the doorway. They saw nothing. Fenwick pushed into the room cautiously. The flashes of light from the convulsion outside penetrated even through Wilmer's poor window and horrible view. What the fuck is that? Fenwick pointed to a corner with a large mass that hadn't been there this morning. They hurried forward. Fenwick held the light while Turner turned over the body. It's Ajax, Turner said. He looked up at Fenwick. Was about to speak when... What was that? He said. Fenwick said, I didn't hear anything. A door slammed. I'm sure of it. It was thunder, Fenwick said. I'm going to check, Turner said. That light isn't right. Turner thought as he made his way down the hall to the top of the stairs. Ah, shit, he muttered. Buck, he yelled. He didn't have to peer over the banister to know it was fire. He called the fire department on his radio as he looked carefully to see how far the blaze had gotten. Fenwick joined him. Triple fuck, Fenwick said. It's caught too much for us to get down, Turner said. The fire had already reached or had been started on the second floor. The movements of whoever started it had been covered by the rising storm. Rear exit, Turner said. They rushed down the hall. Fire flashed up toward them from the back stairs. 2. Fire escape, Fenwick said. Didn't see any as we walked around, Turner said. Triple fuck, Fenwick said. They could feel the heat of the blaze now, different from the humidity. Sweat glistened on their faces. They tried other doors on the floor, all but one opened. They broke that one in, but it too overlooked the street and a fourth-floor drop. Wilmer's room? Turner said. What? Fenwick asked as they entered. Turner hurried to the window. He tried to yank it up, with the same success Fenwick had had. Years of old paint and general disuse had closed it permanently. Turner wrapped his coat around his arm and smashed the glass. Some of the rotted wood fell away at the same time. Turner gazed up into the roaring storm. He ducked his head back in. Shadows of flames flickered in the doorway. We're going to walk up to the roof, Turner announced. Fenwick stuck his head out. Bullshit! We can't do that. Turner reached through the window and touched the building opposite. He pulled his hand back in and said, Both of these dumps are old brick with lots of crumbling spots. The space between isn't that big. Maybe 2 feet. We can crab walk it between the buildings. I'm too fat, Fenwick said. What if I slip? If one of us slips, Turner said, then they scrape up flat cop from the pavement. In here, we get charred corpses. We're taking the chance. It's only 6 feet or so to the roof. Fenwick looked out. Yeah, only. We don't have much time, Buck, Fenwick said. What do we do with the body? Drop him so he doesn't burn? He's already dead. Won't hurt him. If we get a chance, we can come back. Let's go. Turner gave his partner a shove. Fenwick, an ultimately practical man, took one more look back and crawled onto the ledge. He turned back and said, Go close the door to stop the smoke. Turner hurried back, closed it, and returned to the window. He helped Fenwick gain balance. Fenwick wedged a foot in the brick wall. 2 feet away. Triple fuck! Rain slashed Fenwick's soaked body. He steadied his hands on each wall and immediately began to climb. Moments later, Turner followed, wisps of smoke seeping under the doorframe, following out the window. Perhaps 5 minutes had passed since they discovered the body. Rain poured onto Turner, soaking him. Instantly, as he eased himself onto the sill and placed his left hand and foot on the building opposite, he grabbed the best holds he could, thunder and lightning above and a 4-floor drop below. He began his ascent. He moved one limb at a time, testing his grip as he moved. He barely heard Fenwick above him. He dared to look up. He saw his friend with one arm gripped on the edge of Wilmer's building, his left foot wedged into a crevice on the building opposite. He scrabbled with the other foot, trying to catch a hold, and swung his left arm, trying to get it to join the right. Turner came up behind. He held on at 3 points, feet and left arm. He brought his right arm up. He saw Fenwick take another stab at swinging his weight for a grip. At that moment, he shoved at Fenwick's butt. The last push put Fenwick onto the roof. The shove unbalanced Turner. He clutched at the right wall and slipped his knuckle-scraped brick. Skin and blood mixed with the falling rain. He shouted in agony, but made his hand stab into the bricks. Grab hold, Fenwick called. Turner looked up through the rain and saw Fenwick's hand 2 feet from him. Turner resumed, inching his way up, ignoring his burning knuckles. Finally, close enough, he reached for Fenwick's wrist. His partner grabbed at him. Their rain-slick hands rubbed against each other and missed. Turner felt himself unbalancing and beginning to tip. Fenwick's hand grabbed his wrist for a second. He felt a tug, then another slip, finally a firm grasp. For a second, Turner dangled by only his friend's grip. Then he dug his feet into the bricks, launched himself upward, and with a heave from Fenwick, made it to the top. For a moment, they sat breathing on the roof, listening to the wail of approaching fire engines. Temporarily safe, they sloshed through the puddles, gathering on the roof, checking for a way down. Nothing. They studied the possibilities of climbing or jumping to the next building. Through dark and rain, they couldn't see any. The building continued for another 2 stories of deteriorating brick. Rescue from the fire department was the only option. By holding his hand up to his eyes to shield them from the rain, Turner got a spectacular view to the east of lightning striking and restriking the top of Sears Tower. By radio, he told of their predicament, and a couple of minutes later, a few shouts through the slowly abating storm caught the attention of the arriving firemen. The two policemen climbed down ladders to safety. 5 minutes after they reached ground level, the roof caved in, and the departing storm helped douse the flames. 2 hours later, Turner leaned back in his chair behind his desk at the station. In the locker room downstairs, he changed from his sopping clothes. He wore gray gym shorts, white socks, gym shoes, and a white t-shirt with a Chicago police logo on it. Fenwick sat across from him in bright yellow Bermuda shorts and a flowered Hawaiian shirt, left in his locker room from last year's squad picnic. Wilson walked in and gave a wolf whistle. She stopped at Turner's desk, eyed his body appreciatively, ruffled his hair, and said, "I always forget you have the sexiest legs. At times I wish I wasn't quite so happily married." "What about me?" Fenwick said. Wilson said, "Buck, when you decide to trade in your size 20 tent, we'll talk." "What are you doing here?" Fenwick asked. "Overtime, like you," Wilson said. Carruthers burst into the room. "I heard on the radio. Is it true? What happened to you guys?" He rushed across the room, eyes aglow and mouth agape. Wilson asked, "What happened?" The commander walked in, took one look at them, and asked, "Do I want to hear this?" Turner said, "I think this is the new uniform." He didn't remember feeling any fear until sitting down at his desk. Thinking back on what almost happened gave him a queasy feeling. He and Buck explained to the assembled group about the fire and the dead body. "Ajax was his real name?" Carruthers asked when they finished. "Is that important?" Fenwick asked. "You guys okay?" the commander asked. "Good enough," Turner said. Buck nodded agreement. Wilson said, "They killed the old guy because he talked to you?" "That doesn't make sense," the commander said. "He didn't tell you anything." "Maybe they didn't know that," Turner said. "Or they talked to him and found out he knew something that he hadn't told us yet. Or they interrogated him about what Wilmer said. Or maybe he bragged to someone about how in tight he was with the cops. Or they simply wanted to kill us and he was bait." "I don't know," Buck said. "Ajax called and wanted to talk. Now we'll never know what he wanted to tell us." Fenwick thumped his desk with his fist. "Double fuck! This shit doesn't make sense." "Yeah, it does," Turner said. "To whoever's behind it, it makes perfect sense." They discussed the murders and attacks for an hour, but got nowhere. The commander told them to give it a rest. They could start in the morning, trying to trace Ajax's movements and figuring out why he died. At home, Turner found Brian and two of his buddies in the living room, watching a video. For a couple of minutes, Turner watched the Hollywood-style cops shoot guns and race around the streets, smashing into corner fruit stands. He called the hospital to check on Jeff. The nurse told him his son was sleeping comfortably. As soon as he hung up, the phone rang. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. If it was one of Brian's friends, he'd strangle the kid. Instead, a disembodied voice said, "You were lucky. Maybe your kids won't be. Leave your own alone." The phone clicked. Immediately, he called the official number to check on a trace from a phone booth on the far north side of the city. Turner knew what the cops would find when they checked it out. Nothing, and no witnesses. He tried to sleep. The boys downstairs had plans to stay the night, and he heard their rough giggles and rustling for a while. He tossed restlessly, and he was physically tired, but his mind raced, trying to figure out all the possibilities of the murders. The breeze had sprung up again, but still, from the south, carrying more humidity, the front hadn't passed. Tonight's storm had been only a brief respite. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.